Hi, welcome to the Ashtanga channel at Mind Body Fitness Yoga's virtual yoga room. Today I want to share with you the tradition of closing out the practice with the three lotuses. And I'll share what I was taught by my teacher David Williams. The three lotuses are a reverent bow to our practice at the end of the practice. It comes in three stages. There are three lotuses that we observe. The first lotus is the bound lotus, and it is the representation of the lotus as a bud that's newly sprouting. And it's a recognition of the beginnings of our practice. Where did we come from? Where did we start? The second lotus is the lotus in full bloom, and it's a recognition of where we are right now in our practice. And it's also a looking back to where we began. So we recognize and bow with reverence to where our practice has come this far. And then the third lotus is the ascending lotus. It is the lotus that is levitating and floating into the endless possibility of where our practice can take us. Now the mechanics of the lotuses are a little challenging, and at the end of the practice you are pretty warm in your body. For this demonstration, I've got a couple blocks because the third lotus is in Tulasana, and classically we lift sitting in lotus. I have a shoulder injury, but that also gives me the opportunity to share with you a modification until you're strong enough to lift your lotus or your seat. Let's begin with the first lotus, and it is the bound lotus. When we say lotus, of course I don't mean that everyone has to be in lotus, because lotus is not really accessible for probably a majority of the population. And if you force a lotus, you are prone to some knee injuries, ankle injuries, and probably some hip injuries as well. So I urge you to refer to your body and what your body is feeling. So here are some options for sitting. If you are adept at lotus and you can comfortably bring the feet into the opposite hip crease, and comfortably means that as you bring your heel in, it comes into the center or toward the outside of the hip. Don't force the outside of the hip. This is a range of possibility because everybody's built differently. Some people have more externally rotated hips, and that's where their feet go. Everyone's limbs are longer or shorter than yours, so you can't go by what anybody else is doing. I'm a corgi. I have really short, stout legs, but it will look different on someone with longer legs. I can get into lotus and be pretty comfortable here. If that's not comfortable for you, a half lotus is suitable. So you might tuck one foot under and have one heel up into the hip crease. And if your pelvis is peaceful, you know you're making the right choice. You don't want to take all that good work from your practice and then kind of screw it up at the end by doing something that feels strained or overly ambitious. If this is not working for your hips, your knees, or your pelvis, then coming into Sukhasana, an easy seated pose. Again, peaceful pelvis situation. The other part of the bound lotus is the binding. So I am a little tight in my shoulders and hips, so if I were to reach around to hold my feet, that's the classic bind. So my limbs are not really there today, and I've done it a couple of times in my lifetime, but you can actually hold the opposite arm behind you. And let me show you. Turn this way so you can see. So holding the opposite arm. David's practices lately, he's teaching this method of binding the arms, which I love. It's a universal method for getting that bind. The benefits of that benefit of that method is that it opens up your shoulders a little bit. So I'm going to do that today. That's going to be my deferred mode today. Hands back, either crossing and holding the feet, holding the opposite forearm, or retracting your shoulders and lifting your arms back. You can take your palms wide open. You can make them a little more diagonal, or you might close your palms together depending on how your shoulders feel. In all three of the lotuses, we ignite all three bandhas. So Mula Bandha, drawing up through the pelvic floor. I kind of like the idea of drawing my hip points in, and that activates my pelvic floor. And then Uddiyana Bandha, the flying up belly, I like to engage that by lifting the sternum up. I can feel the engagement of that bandha. And then Jalandhara Bandha, chin into the chest. So let's take a deep breath in And as you exhale, coming into Jalandhara Bandha, Uddiyana Bandha, and Mula Bandha, and bowing forward for 10 breaths. Here we go. Deep breath in and out. Keep going. Inhale, coming up, but keep your bandhas. And the second lotus is the lotus in full bloom. Hands are in chin mudra, thumb and index finger lightly touching, and the other 3 fingers pointing away. And in this, when we're in full bloom, we recognize that we keep the good and we release what doesn't serve us any longer. So when we've practiced, we've raised the heat, we have burned off what doesn't suit us or serve us any longer, and we have this newly found cultivated prana life force that we're using now for our fuel. So this also has the 3 lotuses, and as we practice here, we're going to practice with the 3 bandhas, excuse me, and we'll practice with the mindful breath. Now for this video, we're going to do 10 breaths, and the goal here is to have perfect attendance for all 10 of those breaths. In a more extended practice, you might want to do 25 breaths. I know when we practice with David, he usually does 25 breaths, and it's nice and juicy. It's so soothing and mindful. It's a meditation. So let's do 10 breaths together here. Deep breath in, engaging the bandhas, and exhale. 10 deep breaths. Full presence with each breath. And release. The third lotus is the ascending lotus, the floating lotus. And when we do this, we press hands down typically, traditionally. Hands come down to the ground and we lift off the floor. To get the lift, if you bring your hands back by your hips, you're not going to be able to lift. So you have to bring your hands about midway down your thigh, put the palms down, and then using the arms as posts to hold you up, you lift and you breathe. And when you are first learning this, it's probably not realistic that you're in a lotus position. So when you're in half lotus, it becomes a little more difficult, more challenging to lift up. So when I bring my hands down and lift, it's that bottom leg that's a little harder to bring up. And the same if you're in Sukhasana. I think it's okay when you're learning, when you're building strength, to have 1 foot down or to have 2 feet down lightly while you practice this. To make sure your shoulders are safe, it's wise to put your arms in position to support the tent of your body the best way possible. So that means you've got to keep your shoulder blades on your back. You can't hunch forward and wing out your elbows, because that's not going to serve you to build strength. It's going to serve you to learn to do it incorrectly, and it will lead to injury. So retracting the shoulders back and down, press them down, press them down, and then lifting up, and then we do our breath here, which is Bhastrika. Now I find that using blocks is a little more kind to my shoulders and my arms when I'm healing a shoulder injury. And I've got a tender shoulder from all the housework I've been doing during quarantine. I'm going to come back into my lotus. And when you're using the block, same thing. You're taking your hands about midway down your thigh to get good leverage. The palms are going to press into the blocks, and then retracting and depressing the shoulders, you're going to float. The breath for Bhastrika is in and out in equal measure, but it's rapid. So it's a total cleansing of your lungs, a total building of heat and energy. It's like shaking the snow globe with all of your prana that you've built in the practice. It's like the sparks and the fireworks going off before you go into Shavasana. And think about this, the vritti, the energy that you're stirring up here is going to be sparkly and easily witnessed and felt when you're in Shavasana. And the settling of all of that can ride you through your Shavasana with an anchor for your awareness. So I like to think of this as the finishing touch for your practice. And it's the put it all on your mat kind of finishing for this three lotus tradition. It's also investing in the possibility of where your practice could be with diligence and consistency and compassion. So think about that. So you've got the bowing to the beginnings of your practice, your humble beginnings, where you are now, and the infinite possibility of where your practice can take you, because it's an inner journey and you don't know what you're going to find in there every time you get on your mat. So let's do this. Ideally, you do Bhastrika for 108 breaths. For our purposes today, to keep this video brief, we're going to do it for 54 repetitions, which is halfway there. And if you're practicing at home, you don't have to do 108 or 54. You can do what feels good to you. And when you feel like your exhaustion or your fatigue is starting to break your form, that's the signal to come down, to relax and let that go. So always mind your edges there. So let's go. We're going to take a deep breath in, a deep breath out, a half breath in, and then we will begin. Put your hands in place where you need them to be. Start to roll your shoulders back and to press them down. Deep breath in, deep breath out, half breath in, and begin. Lightly come down, releasing your blocks, gently releasing your body. With spare movements, gather up your knees and gently move onto your back. Make sure the spine is linear and nose and chin are up toward the ceiling, and then releasing your legs down. You might toss a blanket over you to hold in all of the warmth and energy that you created in your practice, and then quietly let go and observe what's here. Enjoy the fruits of your labor. Enjoy the view of your practice where you are right now in this moment. And remember what David said. Patabi Joyce told him as great advice one day in a kitchen when they were finished with practice. He said, David, practice, all is coming. So that's what we do. We get on our mats and we do what we can do each day. And then at the end of the practice, we bow with reverence to where we started, what we're doing today, and the possibility of where this practice will take us. Thanks for checking in on the Ashtanga channel, and I hope to see you here in the virtual yoga room again soon. Peace.